Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying era in human engineering. You know, when we think of the 1960s jet age, we usually picture sharp suits, elegant flight attendants, and the absolute marvel of crossing oceans in hours rather than days. But beneath that super glamorous facade lay a hidden reality. Today, we're going to explore how the incredibly safe aviation system that we all rely on today was actually forged in this intense crucible of devastating mysteries and fatal blind spots.
And this quote really captures the vibe of the time. To the general public, stepping aboard a jet in the early 60s really was like touching the future. I mean, it felt impossibly modern and effortless. Passengers were sitting back, sipping cocktails at 30,000 feet, feeling like they were literally living in tomorrow. But what they didn't know, and what we're going to break down for you today, is just how much about these brand new aircraft was still a total mystery.
Because there was this massive gap at the dawn of the jet age. On one hand, the public perceived this glamorous, effortless marvel of modern engineering. But the hidden reality? Well, it was one of deadly mysteries and fatal mechanical flaws. And these flaws weren't just hidden from the flying public, they were completely hidden from the highly trained men sitting right there at the controls.
Which leads us to ask a pretty incredibly important question. What actually happens when a pristine, state-of-the-art machine holds a fatal blind spot? What happens when an aircraft is so new, so advanced that we just haven't figured out how it fails yet? Over the next few minutes, we're going to take you through a series of tragic micro-narratives that completely shattered that era's false sense of security and fundamentally rewired how we build airplanes today.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the mystery of flight controls.
Picture this, it's 1961, and all 18 members of the United States figure skating team board a sleek new Sabina Boeing 707 in New York, heading to the World Championships. Among them is a 16-year-old athlete who had literally just been on the cover of a national magazine. Everything was completely routine right up until the last minute of the flight over Brussels. Basically, a small plane was still on the runway, so the highly experienced crew did exactly what they were trained to do. They added power to go around and try again. But suddenly, the jet just refused to behave. The nose kept rising higher and higher, eventually banking into this vertical roll that it just could not recover from. Every single soul on board perished, erasing an entire generation of American athletes in one heartbreaking moment.
Now, investigators were facing an absolutely impossible task here. The aircraft was completely consumed by fire. And the black boxes, you know, the flight data recorders we just consider standard today? Yeah, they simply didn't exist yet. So investigators could really only guess that the mechanism adjusting the tailplane pitch had jammed or maybe run away on its own. And because they couldn't definitively prove it, Boeing just quietly absorbed the lesson. They issued mechanical modifications to the 707 rather than generating big public headlines. So the machine was fixed, but the mystery, it was never fully solved.
Moving on to Section 2, a single point of failure.
It's wild to think about, but a seemingly innocent action can trigger a fatal chain reaction. Let's break this down like a deadly set of dominoes. Step 1. On an assembly line in New Jersey, a worker reaches into a bundle of autopilot wiring with a pair of tweezers, just trying to tidy them up. Step 2. Those tweezers ever so slightly nick the insulation on the wires. Step 3. On a premiere morning flight out of New York, those damaged wires short-circuit. And Step 4. That short circuit drives the rudder hard over, with absolutely zero command from the pilots. It threw the giant 707 into a sideways skid and rolled it entirely upside down, just a few hundred feet in the air.
2 minutes. That's it. That is exactly how long this flight lasted from takeoff to plunging inverted into the shallow waters of Jamaica Bay. 95 people were killed instantly. The pilots had literally zero time and zero space to fight the machine.
This tragedy exposed a massive, glaring flaw in how early jets were built. The fact that a single damaged bundle of wire could seize a primary flight control and just pull a jet right out of the sky? Unthinkable today. The industry urgently learned a crucial concept here: redundancy. They realized they absolutely had to build backup paths. Never again could one lone short circuit be allowed to completely override the pilots and seize control of a commercial airliner. Which brings us to Section 3, impossible choices and missing data.
Over in France, at Orly Airport, an Air France 707 was carrying more than 100 of Atlanta's cultural leaders. They were accelerating down the runway, passing the speed where you can safely just hit the brakes and abort a takeoff. But when the captain pulled back to lift off, the main wheels stayed pinned to the concrete. An elevator trim motor had failed. The nose came up, sure, but the heavy aircraft simply would not fly.
The captain was handed this impossible choice with basically zero time to make it. He stood on the brakes, threw the engines into reverse, but they just ran out of runway. The plane struck approach lights, and the fully loaded jet became a complete inferno.
Out of 132 people on board, only 2 survived. 2 flight attendants, seated in the very tail section, were thrown clear as the plane broke apart. Over 100 civic leaders from Atlanta died in seconds. And it's incredibly sad, but in their mourning, the city of Atlanta actually built a great art center, taking that immense loss and turning it into something lasting. But once again, investigators had no flight recorders. They had to painstakingly piece together that trim motor failure from the physical wreckage and the surviving accounts.
And we saw this terrifying lack of data play out again up in Canada. A Trans-Canada DC-8 took off on a short hop from Montreal. Just 5 minutes later, it dove almost straight down into a muddy field. The impact was so violent it actually registered on a local seismograph. Investigators had to dig through a flooded crater in the middle of a freezing Canadian winter just to find the pieces. And because Canada didn't require flight recorders yet, it took a whole year of intense guesswork to finally point the finger at the culprit, a device called the pitch trim compensator. They suspected this thing, which was meant to keep the plane stable, mistakenly extended on its own. This essentially tricked the pilots into trimming the aircraft into a fatal, unrecoverable nose-down dive.
And if that wasn't tragic enough, get this. Just 3 months later, an Eastern Airlines DC-8 dove into a lake in New Orleans. When they found it, its stabilizer was trimmed hard nose down. It died the exact same way. It took these 2 massive back-to-back tragedies to finally force manufacturers to physically limit how far nose-down trim could travel. And crucially, it finally pushed Canada to mandate the flight data recorders it had previously lacked. No future crash would ever require a year of muddy guesswork to solve again.
All right, let's look at Section 4, the threat from within.
$1.50, $1.50. That is the meager, completely unbelievable cost of the hardware store explosives that a desperate passenger used to bring down Continental Flight 11, a multi-million-dollar jet airline. Here's what happened. A passenger in deep financial trouble boarded Continental Flight 11 late. He walks on with a briefcase, goes straight to the rear lavatory, and detonates 6 sticks of explosives he'd bought just days earlier. Why? To trigger a life insurance payout for his family. The blast severed the tail section cleanly off, sending the rest of the plane spinning out of the sky over Missouri and taking 45 lives. But you want to know the most shocking part of this whole thing? 0 passenger or baggage screening existed back then. None. Anyone could walk onto a plane with a bomb, and no one would ever look inside their bag. It was a massive vulnerability, and honestly, it wouldn't truly be closed for another decade.
And that brings us to our final section, lessons written in blood. When we look back at all of this, it becomes clear that every highly regulated, redundant, and secure system in the modern aviation machine was quite literally written in blood. The Sabina crash? That gave us mechanical flight control safeguards. The American Airlines tragedy forced the industry to build redundant systems, so a single nicked wire couldn't doom a flight. The Trans-Canada and Eastern crashes mandated the black boxes that solve our modern mysteries. And Continental Flight 11 exposed the terrifying, urgent need for airport security. Every single rule in aviation exists because someone, somewhere, paid the ultimate price to discover a flaw. So I want to leave you with this final thought to reflect upon. Today, we step onto an aircraft without a second thought, right? It's effortless, and it is incredibly safe. But we have to remember, that safety isn't an accident. It is a direct inheritance from those who stepped onto the glamorous, yet fatally flawed jets of the 1960s. They were unwittingly touching a future that was still quite literally learning how to fly. Next time you board a perfectly safe flight, will you remember the lives that bought your security?